All right, gang, episode number 1 in our 10th segment regarding the closing process. And episode number 1 is about hiring a real estate attorney. Lots of folks feel, and you may be one of them, who is watching this series to gain the knowledge necessary to sell their home without a realtor because you might be looking to save money. You don't want to pay a realtor a commission for the work of selling your home. That's okay, but there's going to be a lot of steps along the way that really necessitate legal representation. And as we've mentioned in many previous episodes, it would behoove you to get an attorney on retainer, to pay them whatever is necessary to be on call to guide you through certain steps of that process. And we'll go through them a little bit now. And you're going to spend a little extra money than the average consumer would on legal representation because you don't have a realtor. Your realtor would step in and guide you through a lot of these different processes with standard forms and contracts and negotiations on contingencies and these sorts of things as part of the commission that they expect to earn on the sale. If you haven't got that realtor representing you, then you're really going to want to be represented by an attorney to make sure you're understanding all the legal ramifications of whatever it is that you're representing, whatever it is you're trying to negotiate along the way. So firstly, that legal expertise. You can't necessarily legally fill out all the documents that you need to effect a real estate transaction without legal representation. Could you potentially get your hands on some fillable forms that may allow you to do this? It's possible. Could you potentially pay somebody, a realtor or somebody else, for access to certain fillable forms that could allow you to represent yourself more of the way through the process? Maybe, but take it from a real estate professional who would probably still hire a real estate attorney early on in the process. I've been doing this all my life. I know what I'm doing and guiding myself through the process. I would probably still get an attorney on retainer to make sure I'm not missing literally anything. It's a really big, stressful transaction. We want somebody with the legal acumen necessary to make sure, beyond reasonable doubt, that we're doing everything correctly here and we're not leaving ourselves legally vulnerable to some problem down the road. Feel me? Contract negotiations, of course, is a huge one as well. Again, if you've got some way to access those fillable forms, you could potentially navigate your way through this thing if nothing goes wrong. If there's any sort of pushback from your buyer's side of the table on any portion of a purchase and sales contract or an amendment to the purchase and sales contract to reflect an agreement in the inspection negotiations, there are many different things that could happen that would necessitate changes to fillable form documentation that, again, unless you are a student of the law or in some other way informed as much as you would necessarily need to be a member of the bar, potentially, then there's somebody else out there who can do a better job than you can. And when the stakes are this high and things are this important, it behooves you again to make sure that job is being taken care of by a professional. Title issues, huge. So when you get into contract for the sale of your home with your buyer, purchase and sales contract is signed, the buyer's attorney is going to do a title search. This is going to make sure that going back into sometimes up to 100 years worth of your property's history, if it's been around that long, the documentation recorded with your municipality that proves ownership of your property by each successive owner does not have defect. There is no cloud on title. You would think, maybe you would assume, that if the property has changed hands so many times in the past, how could there possibly be cloud or defect on title this far into the future? Believe me, it happens. Human beings are just that. Fallible, flawed, and able to make mistakes. Not only that, but there are different burdens of proof, different standards as time progresses and things change, the law changes, and maybe something that wasn't a problem in the past is a problem today that creates cloud on title as far as the bank sees or anybody else who has a vested interest in the documentation being correct on this piece of property being used as collateral for a very large loan. Your attorney is going to be there to help you through curing cloud on title, and it's going to be on you to do that. If you don't have a real estate attorney on retainer, once it is brought to light that there might be a defect in your title, you're going to have to go searching for one at that time, delaying your transaction, causing different problems in the mechanics and all the moving parts of the transaction. You know, the buyer's rate lock, for instance, or their need to move at a certain point in time. If you can't satisfy that because you've got cloud on title and you didn't get an attorney on retainer who can then immediately jump on getting this cured, you stand to lose your transaction. Again, have bad optics of bringing your property back to the market. People are going to wonder why. Then you have disclosure issues. You have to tell people that there's defect on title. You're now trying to sell a defective title to another buyer. You can probably assume that there's going to be, in the buyer's mind, a reason for a lower offer in that case, right? And that is not what we want. We want the absolute highest price for your property. So you get the idea. Title issues are important. And the closing process. The buyer's attorney is going to facilitate most of the documentation necessary to actually transfer ownership from you to whomever your buyer is. But do you want to be signing documentation prepared by an attorney that doesn't represent you? There are many things and many ways that documents can be prepared that would bend the upper hand in favor of that attorney's client, and that attorney's client is the buyer, not you. So you do want to have representation for the actual closing and the documents contained therein to make sure that they are fair and equitable. Also to make sure that the buyer is committed in paper, on paper, legally, to curing any problems that might come up post-closing. People don't think about this a lot of the time, but there are plenty of different items that could be discovered in the home or discovered in the paperwork that was signed during the closing after the fact that are deficient and need to be changed. And you want to make sure your attorney is going to bat for you to make that buyer committed to correcting any defect on any of the documentation post-closing. So consider that as well. And you can probably guess at this point a big part of this process, having an attorney, having legal representation on board the whole time, is peace of mind, guys. If you haven't arrived at the fact yet that selling a home is an extraordinarily stressful process and one that needs to happen concurrently with you actually moving, which is, again, one of the 3 most stressful things a human being can do in their lives, moving house, really going to help you sleep a little bit during this process. Especially if you're looking for your next home during the sale. Man, the blood pressure's up here, folks. You know, you got to have somebody going to bat for it. And if it's not a real estate professional who's been doing this his whole career, it's got to be sound legal representation. You get the idea, right? Thanks for sticking around through this. We are on to our next episode, number 2, which is going to be regarding achieving that clear to close status, so that all parties involved are ready to schedule that closing and move on to that part of the process, okay? We'll see you in episode 2. Deuces.